Vanessa smiled at me in front of my son, the realtor, and half the family as if she had already won. She called my late husband's land a sentimental pile of dirt, said I was too old to understand real money, and told everyone I was using grief to keep Caleb trapped under my thumb. I did not argue. I did not reach for the pen she pushed across the table. I only looked at the folder in her manicured hands and thought about the sealed envelope resting inside my purse, the county records waiting in Graham Ellison's briefcase, and the one page of Walter's will that Vanessa had never known existed. Welcome back to Revenge Stories, where family love can turn into public betrayal, and quiet people are often the ones holding the sharpest truth. But before that room went still, before Vanessa's proud smile disappeared, and before my son finally understood what his wife had done, I need to take you back to the land Walter left behind, and the day Vanessa first decided it should belong to her. Walter Mercer was not a rich man, not by the way the world measures richness. He never owned a luxury car, never wore a watch that cost more than a week of groceries, and never understood why anyone would spend $8 on coffee when we had a perfectly good pot at home. But Walter had a kind of wealth most people do not recognize until they lose it. He had patience. He had discipline. He had a promise in his chest that lasted longer than most people's excitement. For 39 years, my husband woke before the sun, pulled on the same brown work boots, kissed the side of my face, and stepped out into work that left his hands cracked and his shoulders stiff by nightfall. He worked construction, roofing, road repair, fence lines, hauling jobs, and later, when his knees began to complain, equipment maintenance for a small agricultural company outside our county. I worked in the cafeteria at Redwood Elementary, serving trays of chicken patties, canned peaches, chocolate milk, and little paper cups of peas no child ever wanted. We were ordinary people with ordinary bills, but Walter had one dream he treated like scripture. He wanted land, not a mansion, not a boat, not a business with his name on a sign. Land. A place that could not be packed into boxes, repossessed by a landlord, or taken because rent went up again. In the early years of our marriage, when Caleb was still small enough to fall asleep with one hand inside my sweater sleeve, Walter would sit at our kitchen table after dinner, open a metal cash box, and count whatever we had saved that month. Sometimes it was $30. Sometimes it was $9. Once, after my transmission failed and Walter spent almost everything fixing it, he placed one single $5 bill in the envelope marked land and said, "Still counts." I asked him why he held on so tightly to a dream that moved so slowly, and he answered, "Because slow is still moving, Evie. The world tricks people into thinking only fast things matter." He called me Evie when he wanted me to stop worrying. He called me Evelyn when he needed me to listen. When Caleb was 17, Walter drove me out to Mill Creek Road. I remember that day with the kind of clarity grief gives to memories, making every color brighter because you cannot go back and touch them. It was September. The fields were yellowing under late summer heat, and the air smelled like dust, wild grass, and creek water. Walter parked beside a rusted gate and helped me out of the truck even though I told him I was perfectly capable of climbing down myself. He had that nervous look on his face, the one he wore the night he proposed, and I thought perhaps something was wrong. Then he opened the gate and said, "Walk with me." We crossed a narrow path through tall grass, past a crooked fence post, and climbed a small hill where one old oak tree leaned over the land like a guardian. From there, we could see the creek, the lower pasture, the line of woods, and the rise where the sunset fell like warm honey. Walter reached into his jacket pocket and handed me folded papers. The deed. 46 acres, paid for in full. I cried before I read the first line. Walter pretended to complain because crying embarrassed him, but his own eyes were wet. He pointed across the field and said, "No landlord, no rent notice, no one raising the price because they can. This is ours." I told him it was beautiful, and he shook his head. "Not beautiful. Safe." That was Walter. Beauty mattered to him, but safety mattered more. He had grown up with a father who drank away paychecks and a mother who moved children from one rented house to another, each place smaller than the last. He understood what it meant to live where someone else held the keys. He never wanted me to know that fear. Over the years, the Mill Creek land became the quiet heart of our family. Caleb learned to drive there, nearly crashed into the old hay shed, and cried when Walter laughed too hard. We planted apple trees near the ridge. Only 3 survived the first winter, but Walter loved them as if they were prize horses. We held Caleb's graduation cookout beneath the oak tree. We celebrated anniversaries there, not fancy ones, just folding chairs, lemonade, a radio playing old country songs, and Walter's hand on my back as if, after decades, he still needed to know I was close. When my mother died, I sat by the creek and let the sound cover my sobs. When Walter got the first diagnosis, we drove there after the appointment and did not speak for a long time. Cancer is a word that makes even open fields feel smaller. Walter fought hard. He did not make dramatic speeches, but he endured treatment with a stubborn dignity that made nurses call him Sir, even when he was too weak to sit up. During those months, he became strangely private about papers. He visited Graham Ellison, his estate lawyer, several times without me. I assumed he was updating normal things, because dying people think about arrangements, and loving spouses let them keep whatever little control remains. One afternoon, when his body was thin but his mind still sharp, he asked me to take him to the oak tree. I wrapped him in a wool coat even though it was not cold, drove slowly, and helped him sit on the bench Caleb had built years earlier. Walter looked across the field as if he were memorizing it for a place beyond memory. Then he said, "Promise me you won't sell because someone makes you feel guilty." I tried to laugh through tears. Who would make me feel guilty about this place? He did not smile. He looked at me with those gray eyes that had always seen more than he said. Greed does not always come wearing a stranger's face, Evelyn. Sometimes it walks in calling you family. I told him Caleb would never hurt me. Walter reached for my hand and squeezed it with surprising strength. Caleb has a good heart, but a good heart can still be steered by a strong voice. I hated hearing that because I wanted him to leave this world believing our son would protect me. Walter seemed to know that, and his voice softened. I am not accusing the boy. I am protecting you from whatever life brings when I am not standing beside you. He died 3 months later on a rainy Tuesday morning. The world did not stop, which felt offensive. The mail still came. The trash truck still groaned down the street. Someone's dog still barked at 7 in the evening. People brought casseroles, flowers, cards, and sentences that were supposed to comfort me but mostly made me feel trapped behind glass. Caleb was devastated. He sat beside me at the funeral, holding my hand so tightly my fingers hurt. At the graveside, he whispered, "I'll take care of you, Mom." I believed him. Perhaps that was not foolish. Perhaps it was simply a mother choosing hope over warning. For the first year after Walter died, Caleb came every Sunday. He mowed my lawn, fixed small things around the house, and drove me to Mill Creek when the weather was too bad for me to go alone. We were not perfect, but we were close in the way grief sometimes makes people cling together because the empty chair is too much to face. Then he met Vanessa. Vanessa Mercer did not enter a room. She arrived. There was always a small performance around her, even when she did nothing more than remove her sunglasses. She had smooth blonde hair, clear skin, expensive nails, and a smile that made older women call her charming and younger women check their reflection. Caleb brought her to dinner on a warm May evening, and she came carrying lilies and a bottle of wine she said was from a vineyard in Oregon, though I later saw the same bottle on sale at the grocery store. That detail did not matter then. What mattered was how carefully she watched my house. Her eyes moved over Walter's photograph, the old mantel clock, the framed deed sketch of the land, the silver serving spoons from my mother, and the stack of mail on the side table. She hugged me and said, "I have heard so much about you, Mrs. Mercer. Caleb says you're the heart of the family." It sounded kind. It also sounded rehearsed. I wanted to like her because Caleb loved her. A mother can sense danger and still hope she is wrong. At dinner, Vanessa laughed at Walter's stories with perfect timing. She called my pot roast comfort food in the best way. She asked about my work at the school cafeteria as if I had managed a 5-star kitchen. After dessert, while Caleb cleared plates, she sat beside me and asked about Mill Creek Road. "Caleb mentioned your husband bought land years ago," she said. "That must be such a responsibility now." I told her it was not a responsibility. It was a gift. She nodded, but her eyes sharpened. 46 acres, right? In this market, that must be valuable. I said I did not think of it that way. She placed her hand lightly over mine. Of course not. You're sentimental. That's sweet. Sweet. The word landed softly, but something beneath it was not soft at all. Caleb and Vanessa married 11 months later. The wedding was lovely, though Vanessa made sure everyone knew exactly how expensive lovely could be. She did not ask much from me directly, but she made me feel the difference between being included and being allowed. My dress was approved, not admired. My table was near the front, but not too near. Walter's photograph was placed on a small memorial table near the guest book, and Vanessa told me it was tasteful that we did not make the day too heavy with grief. Caleb looked happy, so I swallowed the sting. During the mother-son dance, he cried, and I held him against me the way I had when he was 5 and feverish. I remember looking across his shoulder and seeing Vanessa watching us. She was smiling, but her eyes were flat. The first year of their marriage, Vanessa played the perfect daughter-in-law when people could see her. She sent flowers on Mother's Day, though the card said, "From Caleb and Vanessa," in handwriting that was clearly Caleb's. She posted pictures of family dinners with captions about blessed roots and legacy. She called me Mom in public. In private, she began correcting me. She corrected how I folded napkins, where I kept spices, how I spoke about money, how often I visited the land, how many old things I had emotionally attached myself to. She never sounded angry at first. Anger would have exposed her too early. She sounded concerned. Concern is one of the easiest masks for control. The first direct conversation about selling came on a Sunday afternoon after Caleb had stepped into the garage. Vanessa remained at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she had not touched. She looked out the window toward the backyard and said, "Evelyn, have you ever considered what Walter would want now, not 20 years ago?" I said Walter had been very clear. She smiled with pity. "I mean, if he could see Caleb under pressure, mortgage rates, medical insurance, inflation, career risks. He was a father. Surely he would want his son to benefit from dead equity." I repeated the phrase because I had never heard something so cold wrapped in such neat language. Debt equity. Vanessa took a careful sip of tea. Land that isn't producing enough value. It's just sitting there while living people struggle. I told her the land produced peace. She laughed lightly. Peace does not pay bills. From then on, Mill Creek Road became the invisible third person in every room. If Caleb mentioned a credit card balance, Vanessa's eyes moved to me. If their roof needed repair, she sighed about unused resources. When she wanted a larger home closer to her preferred neighborhood, she said, "It is strange how some families sit on opportunities while the next generation sacrifices." At Thanksgiving, while passing sweet potatoes, she told Aunt Lorna, "Evelyn is very traditional. She believes property should stay frozen in time." I said nothing because Caleb looked embarrassed, and I did not want a holiday argument. Vanessa learned from that silence. She learned she could shame me and I would protect the atmosphere. That became her favorite arrangement. She began taking over small parts of my life with the excuse of helping. She changed the pharmacy delivery number to her phone so you won't miss anything important. She offered to manage online billing because websites can be confusing. She started collecting my mail from the porch when she visited, handing me only what she decided mattered. When I objected, Caleb said, "Mom, she's just organized. Let her help." I tried to explain that help offered without respect becomes control. But Caleb had entered that fog husbands sometimes enter when peace at home depends on agreeing with the loudest person. He was not cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruelty can be fought. Weakness must be mourned. The first time Vanessa removed Walter from my living room, I found his framed fishing photograph in a cardboard box in the laundry room. He was standing beside Lake Hartwell in that picture, wearing a faded cap and holding a fish too small for the pride on his face. It had been on the mantel since before Caleb graduated high school. In its place, Vanessa had arranged tall ceramic vases and a mirror I did not own. I stood there holding Walter's picture against my chest when she walked in. "Oh, good. You found it," she said, as if I had misplaced it. I asked why she moved it. She smiled. "The room needed air. Too many old memories can make a house feel like a museum." I said, "He built this house." She replied, "And now we are trying to make it livable." I waited for Caleb to defend his father. He rubbed the back of his neck and said, "Mom, it does look brighter." That small betrayal cut deeper than Vanessa's insult. Soon after, a property tax notice disappeared. I did not know it was missing until a late reminder arrived. Vanessa found it first, of course. She brought it into the kitchen while Caleb was there and held it between two fingers. "Evelyn, this is serious," she said. "You cannot just ignore tax notices because paperwork stresses you out." I told her I had never received the first notice. She looked wounded. "Are you saying I took it?" Caleb's face tightened before I answered. I said, "I am saying my mail should not pass through anyone else's hands." Vanessa turned to Caleb with tears already rising. "I cannot win. If I help, she accuses me. If I stop helping, she forgets important bills." Caleb sighed and said, "Mom, maybe Vanessa and I should handle the land expenses for a while." I looked at my son, this grown man I had once taught to tie his shoes, and realized he was asking me to surrender control without understanding that he had been led to the request one incident at a time. Public humiliation came next because Vanessa understood that private pressure becomes stronger when supported by public pity. At church, she began speaking about me in that careful voice people use around illness. "Evelyn has been having a hard time letting go," she told women near the coffee table. We are praying for wisdom." At a community dinner, she placed her hand on my shoulder and told 3 couples, "She still drives out to that land like Walter is waiting there. It's heartbreaking, but at some point, grief has to stop making financial decisions." One woman looked at me with such pity, I almost slapped the casserole spoon from her hand. Instead, I smiled and said, "Walter is not waiting there. His promise is." Vanessa laughed, not loudly, just enough. "See, that is exactly what I mean. She speaks about land like it is a person." People shifted uncomfortably. Caleb stared at his plate. After dinner, Arthur Bell followed me outside. Arthur had been Walter's closest friend for more than 4 decades, a broad-shouldered widower with white hair, a slow walk, and eyes that missed very little. He had helped Walter repair fences on Mill Creek before Caleb was grown. He had stood beside us at the funeral. In the parking lot, under the yellow church lights, he said, "Evelyn, I do not like the way that woman talks about you." I said Vanessa was ambitious, maybe insensitive, but Caleb loved her. Arthur gave me a look that only old friends can give, the kind that carries both affection and rebuke. "Walter never called Mill Creek dirt. He called it shelter. You remember that?" I told him I did. Arthur lowered his voice. "Talk to Graham Ellison. Walter had reasons for keeping that lawyer close near the end." I said I did not want to make things worse. Arthur looked toward the church doors where Vanessa was laughing beside my son. "Things are already worse. You are just the last person trying to be polite about it." I did not call Graham immediately. That was another mistake. But grief makes you slow to admit that family has become dangerous. I kept hoping Caleb would wake up. I kept thinking one honest conversation would fix what manipulation had built. So I invited him to lunch without Vanessa. I made chicken salad sandwiches the way he liked them and set out Walter's favorite pickles. Caleb arrived tense, checking his phone before he even sat down. I told him I felt pressured. I told him Vanessa had been speaking about me as if I were unstable. I told him I did not want her handling my mail, my appointments, or my land records. Caleb listened, but not with an open heart. He listened like a man preparing to report back. When I finished, he said, "Mom, Vanessa feels rejected by you." I stared at him. Rejected? She is trying to take control of my property. He winced. She is trying to plan for our future. I asked, "And where am I in that future?" He looked down at his plate and said, "That depends on whether you let us help." There it was again. Help. Wearing another mask. A week later, Vanessa scheduled a doctor's appointment for me without asking. She left the paper on my counter, circled in pink ink, with a little sticky note that said, "Just routine, Mom. We love you." Beneath the appointment details were the words, "Cognitive Capacity Evaluation." I read them 3 times before the meaning fully entered me. She was not just trying to make me look stubborn. She was building a path to declare me incapable. That night, Caleb called and spoke too quickly. "Mom, don't make a big deal out of the appointment. It's just precautionary." I asked who suggested it. He said Vanessa thought it would protect everyone. I asked, "Protect who from what?" He was silent for a moment, then said, "From confusion, from future mistakes." My voice stayed calm, but something inside me turned to ice. "Caleb, I know my name. I know my bills. I know my land. And I know when I am being cornered." He whispered, "Please don't talk like that." I said, "Please don't make me need to." I went to the appointment anyway, not because Vanessa commanded it, but because I wanted proof. Dr. Celia Rowan was a calm woman in her 50s, with silver at her temples and no patience for theatrical concern. She asked questions, Dates, addresses, medications, legal responsibilities, memory sequences, family contacts, financial accounts. I answered each one. Then she closed the folder and asked gently, "Mrs. Mercer, has anyone asked you to sign documents recently?" I looked at the floor, then back at her. I could have protected Caleb. I could have pretended. But I heard Walter's voice from the oak tree. "Promise me you won't sell because someone makes you feel guilty." So I said, "Yes. My daughter-in-law wants my land transferred or sold. She is telling people I am confused." Dr. Roan's face did not change much, but her pen moved. She asked whether I felt safe at home. I said, "I feel watched, corrected, and handled. I do not feel safe with my own papers." She printed a formal report confirming my full mental capacity and included a note documenting reported coercive family pressure. She placed it in an envelope and told me, "Keep this somewhere outside your home." That same afternoon, I drove to Graham Ellison's office. Graham's office had not changed much since Walter's estate meeting. Dark bookshelves, brass lamps, a wall clock that ticked with stern confidence, and stacks of files arranged so neatly they looked almost military. Graham was older now, thinner in the face, but he still had the kind of presence that made panic feel unnecessary. He stood when I entered and said, "Evelyn." Not Mrs. Mercer, not formal, just my name, heavy with the knowledge that widows do not come to estate lawyers unless something has gone wrong. I told him everything: the comments, the tax notice, the doctor appointment, the pressure to sign, Vanessa's public remarks, Caleb's shifting tone. Graham listened without interruption, his hands folded on the desk. When I finished, he removed his glasses and said, "Walter was afraid this might happen in some form." My breath caught. "He knew Vanessa?" Graham shook his head. "No, he knew human nature." He opened Walter's estate file, a thick folder with tabs in Walter's blocky handwriting. I almost cried seeing it. Graham touched the folder lightly. "Your husband updated his documents after the cancer spread. He was particularly concerned that after his death, someone might use guilt, age, or Caleb's emotional dependence to force a transfer." I asked why he had never told me. Graham looked at me with kindness that did not soften the truth. "Because he wanted you to live, not spend your first years of widowhood expecting betrayal. But he also wanted the protection ready." He then gave me instructions that changed everything. "Do not warn Vanessa. Do not confront her alone. Save every text and voicemail. Photograph documents. Move your mail to a post office box. Get copies of all property records. Let her believe you are still only hurt. People who think you are weak become careless." Before I left, Graham handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in Walter's handwriting. I nearly dropped it. "Not yet," Graham said when he saw my fingers moving toward the flap. "Keep it with you. When the time is right, you will know." I placed it in my purse like it was a fragile living thing. Walking out of that office, I did not feel victorious. I felt sad. There is a particular sorrow in realizing your husband loved you enough to prepare for a betrayal you were still trying to deny. The next month, Vanessa grew bolder. She began treating my house like a waiting room I had overstayed. She replaced my curtains without asking. She moved my recipe box into a drawer because counter-clutter ages a kitchen. She started calling repairmen herself and telling them Caleb and Vanessa were transitioning into management of the property. When I corrected her, she laughed and said, "Evelyn, language does not need to be a battlefield." One afternoon, I found 2 moving brochures on my kitchen table. Assisted living communities, beautiful photographs of smiling seniors playing cards beneath artificial chandeliers. Vanessa came in carrying grocery bags and saw me holding them. "Those are just options," she said. "You might enjoy being around people your own age." I said, "I enjoy being in my own home." She placed the lettuce in the refrigerator and replied, "For now." Those 2 words stayed with me all night. Her cruelty toward Walter's memory also sharpened. She stopped pretending respect. During a family barbecue at my house, one of Caleb's cousins asked about the apple trees at Mill Creek. I said they had finally started producing, and Vanessa, flipping through something on her phone, said, "That land produces about 12 apples and $10,000 of stress." People laughed because they thought it was a joke. I did not. Later, when I went inside to get extra plates, I heard her in the dining room telling another woman, "Evelyn acts like Walter was some visionary because he bought acreage before prices rose. Honestly, it was luck. Now everyone has to worship his dirt pile forever." My hand tightened around the cabinet handle. I heard Caleb say, "Vanessa, come on." But he said it softly, like a man brushing a crumb off a table, not stopping a knife. She answered, "What? It's true." I waited until my breathing steadied, then carried the plates outside. That night I began a folder. Not a revenge folder. Not at first. I called it protection. I printed text messages. I wrote dates and descriptions. I stored copies of tax notices, appointment papers, photographs of moved belongings, and notes from conversations. I forwarded everything to Graham's office. The act of documenting changed me. Pain that lives only inside your chest can be questioned, minimized, twisted. Pain placed on paper becomes harder to erase. Vanessa still believed she was dealing with an old woman who valued peace too much to fight. She did not understand that Walter had been a patient man, and I had learned patience beside him. Waiting did not mean surrender. Sometimes waiting meant letting the other person show the court who they really were. Then I found the first sign of the developer. I had gone to Mill Creek early on a Thursday, expecting solitude. The grass was damp, and mist lay across the lower field. I carried pruning shears and a thermos of coffee, planning to trim the apple trees and sit beneath the oak. Instead, I saw orange survey flags near the creek. 2 men in reflective vests were measuring the slope. A white pickup truck sat by the gate with a logo, Vale Development Group. My stomach turned. I walked toward them slowly and asked what they were doing. One man checked his clipboard and said, "Preliminary survey for potential development. We were told the owners are preparing for sale." I said, "I am the owner." He looked uncomfortable, then showed me the work order. Contact, Vanessa Mercer. Development inquiry, luxury cabin community, event venue, road expansion feasibility. Luxury cabins, event venue. On Walter's shelter. I did not scream. I took photos of everything: the truck, the flags, the clipboard, the men's business cards, the date and time. Then I asked them to leave until ownership could be verified. One man apologized. The other looked irritated, but they packed up. I stood there after they drove away, staring at the orange flags like wounds in the ground. Under the oak tree, I called Graham. My voice sounded almost unfamiliar when I said, "They have stepped onto the land." Graham did not ask unnecessary questions. He told me to photograph every flag, then drive to the county records office and ask for Nora Whitfield. Nora Whitfield was younger than I expected, perhaps early 30s, with serious brown eyes and a pen tucked behind one ear. She worked in land records and had the brisk kindness of someone who had seen families turn vicious over property lines. Graham had called ahead. She led me to a side desk and said, "Mrs. Mercer, there has been an attempted electronic recording involving your property." My hands rested on my purse, inches from Walter's sealed envelope. "What kind of recording?" I asked. Nora pulled up the file and turned the monitor slightly. "A quick claim deed transferring your interest in the Mill Creek parcel to Caleb Mercer and Vanessa Mercer." The room blurred around the edges. She continued gently. "It has not been recorded. The notary information raised a flag, and the signature appears inconsistent with prior documents, so it is on administrative hold." She printed a copy. My name sat at the bottom in ink that pretended to be mine. The loop of the E was close, the slant was close, but it was not my hand. There is a strange violence in seeing your own name forged. It feels like someone reached inside your body and tried to move your bones. Nora said, "Someone is trying to move your land without you." I looked at the fake signature and felt something settle inside me. Not rage exactly, but a kind of final clarity. Until that moment, part of me had still been making excuses. Vanessa was pushy. Vanessa was greedy. Vanessa was cruel. But this was beyond cruelty. This was a plan. Graham examined the deed under a desk lamp that afternoon. He compared it to my real signature from older records. He circled the notary stamp, the electronic submission time, the email trail. "This is not merely pressure," he said. "This is attempted fraud, possibly forgery, and depending on what we find, elder financial abuse." I asked whether Caleb had participated. Graham paused, and I hated him for the pause because it told me the truth was not simple. "We do not assume. We investigate." He requested preservation of records from the county, the notary, the survey company, and Vale Development Group. He also told me to stop discussing property matters inside my home. "Let Vanessa create the next move," he said. "She already believes she controls the story. That belief will make her careless." Careless she became. Vanessa sent me a long text 2 days later. It read, "Evelyn, I know you went to the land and embarrassed the survey team. This is exactly why Caleb and I are worried. Your emotional reactions are becoming damaging. We are trying to create generational security, and you are sabotaging us because you cannot separate Walter's memory from real life." I forwarded it to Graham before answering. Then I wrote, "I did not authorize anyone to survey my property." She replied, "You will thank us later when you are not drowning in taxes and loneliness." I saved that too. Later that evening, Caleb called. Vanessa was clearly nearby because his words sounded borrowed. "Mom, you cannot keep humiliating us in front of professionals." I asked, "Did you know surveyors were sent to Mill Creek?" He hesitated. Vanessa said it was just exploratory. I closed my eyes. "Did you know a deed was submitted with my signature?" Silence. Then too quietly, "What?" That one word told me he had not known. It did not absolve him, but it told me where Vanessa had drawn her lines. She realized the deed had surfaced because her strategy changed again. She moved from pressure to performance. She began calling relatives. Aunt Lorna told me Vanessa had cried on the phone for 20 minutes, saying I was accusing her of crimes because I was jealous of her marriage. A cousin messaged me, maybe everyone should sit down with a mediator. Vanessa told church friends she was heartbroken because I refused help and was becoming paranoid. She spoke in sad fragments, never enough to be legally specific, always enough to poison the room before I entered it. At the grocery store, a woman I barely knew touched my cart and said, "Evelyn, grief does strange things. Don't push away the young people trying to help you." I smiled because I had learned that correcting rumors one by one is like trying to empty a river with a teaspoon, but I was no longer alone. Arthur Bell began driving by Mill Creek at odd hours. Nora kept Graham updated about any new filings. Dr. Roan's report sat in a safe deposit box, along with Walter's envelope. Graham's assistant helped me set up a secure email folder. I opened a post office box. I changed passwords. I requested copies of every land record connected to Mill Creek. I even found old letters Walter had written to Graham about protecting my right to remain there. One note said, "Evelyn will choose peace too long. Draft this strong enough that peace does not cost her the land?" I cried when I read that. Walter had known me. He had loved me as I was, but he had also protected me from the weakness hidden inside my goodness. Vanessa's next attack involved my home. Not the land this time, but the place where Walter and I had lived most of our married life. She arrived one Saturday with Caleb and a stack of storage bins. I had not invited them. Vanessa breezed in wearing workout clothes that had never seen exercise and said, "We are simplifying today." I asked what that meant. Caleb looked uncomfortable. "Mom, don't get upset. We just thought clearing some of Dad's things might help." I looked at him as if he had spoken in another language. Vanessa opened the hall closet and pulled out Walter's old jackets. "These are just sitting here collecting dust. There are veterans' charities that would appreciate them." Walter had never served in the military. That was how little she cared. She reached for the brown work jacket he had worn for 20 years, the one that still carried faint traces of cedar, oil, and him. I stepped between her and the closet. "Do not touch that." Her smile vanished. "This is unhealthy." I said, "No. What is unhealthy is walking into a widow's house and packing her husband like trash." Caleb said, "Mom, Vanessa is trying to help you move forward." I turned on him then, not loudly, but with the full weight of my grief. "Your father is not clutter, Caleb." He flinched, and for a second I saw shame in his eyes. Vanessa saw it too, and she hated it. That evening, she sent another text. "Today proved why decisions cannot be left to emotion. We need legal structure before this gets worse." I forwarded it. The family solution meeting was Vanessa's masterpiece, or so she thought. She planned it with the confidence of a woman who believed appearances could overrule documents. She invited Caleb's aunt, 2 cousins, a realtor named Martin, a financial advisor friend of hers, and a representative connected to Vale Development Group. She told everyone it was a compassionate meeting about my future and the land's burden. She told Caleb I needed to be surrounded by family because I was spiraling. She even ordered pastries and fresh flowers, as if betrayal looked less ugly with powdered sugar beside it. Caleb called me the night before and begged me to come with an open heart. I asked him whether Vanessa had invited a lawyer. He said, "No, Mom, no one wants to attack you." I said, "Then she will not mind if Graham attends." Caleb groaned. "That will make it feel hostile." I answered, "Caleb, asking me to sign away land without counsel is hostile. Bringing counsel is called breathing." He did not like that, but he did not stop me. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully, not for vanity, for dignity. I wore a navy dress Walter liked, my plain pearl earrings, and the wedding band I had never removed. I placed Walter's sealed envelope in my purse, along with Dr. Roan's capacity report and copies of Vanessa's messages. Graham had the rest. Before leaving, I stood beside Walter's chair, now back near the window where it belonged, and rested my hand on its worn leather arm. "Today, then," I whispered. The house was quiet, but I felt him with me in the steadiness of my own breathing. Vanessa opened the door before I knocked. She looked radiant. Cream silk blouse, soft makeup, diamond bracelet, every inch the grieving daughter-in-law who had done everything she could. "Evelyn," she said warmly, loud enough for the room to hear, "I'm so glad you came." Her eyes dropped briefly to my purse. "No need to be nervous. We're all family." I stepped inside and saw the arrangement at once. She had placed herself at the head of the dining table. Caleb stood near the fireplace, pale and anxious. Aunt Lorna sat with a tissue already in her hand, prepared for whatever emotional play Vanessa had sold her. The realtor had a folder. The development representative avoided looking directly at me. On the table, beside a vase of white roses, lay a packet of papers and a pen. Vanessa began before anyone could settle. "Thank you all for coming. This has been painful, but Caleb and I felt we needed witnesses because every private conversation has become impossible." She glanced at me sadly. "Evelyn believes we are trying to take something from her. The truth is, we are trying to protect this family from financial stagnation and from decisions made out of unresolved grief." I sat down slowly. My hands were steady in my lap. Vanessa continued, "The Mill Creek property is valuable, but it is unmanaged. Taxes, liability, maintenance, development pressure. It is too much for one elderly person, especially someone emotionally attached to the past. Caleb and I have offered to manage it. We have offered to create a plan that benefits everyone. But Evelyn refuses because she has turned Walter's memory into a wall. No one defended me. Not at first. That is what public humiliation does. It makes decent people uncertain because cruelty dressed as concern creates confusion." Vanessa slid the papers toward me. "Today, we are asking Evelyn to sign a management transfer and begin the sale review process. She will be cared for. She will have funds. Caleb will be able to breathe. This family can stop being held hostage by one person's refusal to move on." I looked at the pen and then at my son. Caleb's eyes were wet, but he said nothing. That hurt, but it no longer surprised me. I turned to Vanessa and asked, "Is that what you told the survey team?" Her expression flickered. Only once, but I saw it. "I told professionals we were exploring options," she said, "because someone had to act like an adult." I removed a photograph from my purse and placed it on the table. Orange flags across Walter's field, the Vale development truck at the gate. They were on my land without permission. Vanessa gave a small laugh. "Preliminary surveys are not theft." I placed the county printout beside the photograph. "And the deed with my forged signature." Caleb's head snapped up. The room changed temperature. Vanessa's eyes widened with perfect innocence. "What are you talking about?" I said. "A quitclaim deed was submitted to transfer my land to you and Caleb. My signature was forged." Caleb turned to her. "Vanessa?" She put a hand to her chest. "I cannot believe this. This is exactly what I warned you about. She is accusing me of a felony because she cannot handle a difficult conversation." Aunt Lorna whispered, "Evelyn, is that true?" I looked at my sister-in-law and said, "Yes, and Graham Ellison has the records." The front door opened then. Graham entered with his briefcase, followed by Nora Whitfield and Arthur Bell. Vanessa stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "This is inappropriate," she said. Graham removed his coat with maddening calm. "I agree. Asking a widow to sign property documents after an attempted forged transfer is highly inappropriate." The realtor closed his folder. The development representative shifted toward the door. Graham looked at him and said, "Mr. Vale's office has already received preservation notice. I recommend you remain available for questions." The man sat back down. Vanessa tried to regain the room. "This is a family matter, and Evelyn is escalating because she wants control. Graham placed his briefcase on the table and opened it. The law has a different vocabulary for what happened. He removed the first document. Before anyone discusses management, sale, or transfer, everyone should understand Walter Mercer's estate plan. Vanessa folded her arms. We know the will. Caleb inherits after Evelyn. Graham looked at her over his glasses. You know the portion discussed publicly after Walter's death. You do not know the protective rider attached to the will. That was the first time I saw fear enter her face without permission. Graham turned toward the others. Walter Mercer executed a final estate rider during his illness. It was properly signed, witnessed, and notarized. It grants Evelyn Mercer lifetime control over Mill Creek Road and prohibits any sale, transfer, mortgage, management agreement, or development action without her voluntary written consent, confirmed by independent counsel. He placed the document on the table. Caleb leaned forward. His father's signature was there, unmistakable. Graham continued. The rider also contains a coercion clause. If any heir, spouse of an heir, agent, buyer, developer, or associated party attempts to obtain the property through pressure, fraud, forged signature, misrepresentation of capacity, medical manipulation, or unauthorized filing, the offending party loses any direct or indirect benefit from the property. If the heir is involved or benefits from such conduct, his inheritance is suspended and subject to trust review. The land transfers into the Mercer Heritage Trust, with Evelyn as sole lifetime trustee. Aunt Lorna whispered, Walter did that? Graham nodded. Walter loved his family. He also understood that grief and age can make a widow vulnerable to people who confuse opportunity with entitlement. Caleb picked up the page, and his hands shook. Dad thought I would do this. His voice cracked on the word Dad. Graham's answer was careful. Your father hoped you would not, but he refused to make your mother's safety dependent on hope. I watched my son absorb that sentence. It did not enter him quickly. Truth rarely does when it has to pass through pride first. He looked at me, and for the first time in months, he seemed truly to see me, not as an obstacle, not as a grieving woman being difficult, as his mother, sitting in a room where his wife had arranged a public surrender. Mom, he said softly, why didn't you tell me? I could have softened it. I could have protected him from the full shame of his silence. I loved him enough not to. I tried, Caleb, but every time I spoke, you listened to her tears louder than my truth. Vanessa snapped. Oh, please! This is theater! She pointed at Graham. You planned this. All of you planned this to humiliate me. I looked at the pastries, the flowers, the pen, the audience she had invited. No, Vanessa. You brought the stage. I only brought the ending you did not expect. Her face hardened. I did what Caleb was too weak to do. Someone had to think about our future. Caleb stood very still. Graham placed the attempted deed on the table. Nora stepped forward and explained the county hold, the signature inconsistency, the notary irregularity, and the submission path connected to Vanessa's email. Vanessa denied using that email. Graham produced the survey authorization. She denied understanding what she signed. The development representative, sensing the room had turned dangerous, said, We were told Mrs. Mercer was ready to sell and that the son had authority. Vanessa said the mother was emotional, but manageable. Manageable. That word finished what the deed had started. Caleb turned to his wife. You called my mother manageable? Vanessa's face twisted. Because she is. Look at what she has done to you. Look at how she keeps you small. Your father is dead, Caleb. Dead. And she has you worshiping a field like it's a church. The room went silent, but it was not the old, confused silence. It was the silence of people finally hearing the real voice beneath the polished one. Vanessa seemed to realize she had said too much, but anger had already carried her past strategy. She turned on me. "You are selfish. You could have helped us. You could have given your son a better life. Instead, you clung to land you do not even use because being Walter's widow is the only identity you have left." For one second, the words struck deeply, not because they were true, but because cruelty does not need truth to wound. I thought of Walter's thin hand in mine beneath the oak tree. I thought of every morning he had counted small bills into an envelope. I thought of the work boots by the back door, the apple trees, the creek, the promises made by people who had nothing but kept them anyway. Then I looked at Vanessa and said quietly, "You mistook my grief for weakness because you have never loved anything you were not trying to own." Graham moved to the final part. He placed Dr. Roan's report on the table, along with printed texts and voicemail transcripts. "Mrs. Mercer has been evaluated and found fully capable. She has documented repeated pressure, public statements suggesting incapacity, unauthorized mail handling, a hidden tax notice incident, a pre-scheduled capacity evaluation, unauthorized survey activity, and an attempted deed filing. We will be providing these materials to the appropriate authorities and notifying all relevant parties that the coercion clause has been triggered." Vanessa laughed, but it came out thin. "You cannot prove I forged anything." Graham said, "That will be determined by the investigation. But the trust clause does not require a criminal conviction to block benefit. It requires documented attempted coercion or unauthorized transfer activity. We have more than enough to act." The meeting ended with no dramatic slap, no screaming collapse, no sudden apology. Real downfall often begins with people gathering their coats. The realtor left first, muttering that he had been misinformed. The development representative hurried out while calling someone named Preston. Aunt Lorna cried into her tissue for a different reason now. Arthur stood behind my chair like an old tree. Nora gave me a small nod before leaving. Vanessa remained by the dining table, breathing hard, her beautiful face stripped of all softness. Caleb sat down as if his legs could no longer hold him. He looked at the deed copy, then the will writer, then his wife. "Did you forge it?" he asked. Vanessa did not answer. She only said, "Everything I did was because you refused to choose us." Caleb whispered, "You made me almost lose my mother." Vanessa's reply was cold. "No, Caleb. Your mother made you weak enough to care." That was the last sentence she spoke in my house. The aftermath unfolded over months, and it was quieter than people imagine revenge should be. Graham formally activated the Mercer Heritage Trust protections. The county rejected the attempted deed and preserved the record. The Notary Commission became part of an investigation. Vale Development Group sent a polished letter claiming they had acted based on misrepresented authority and were withdrawing all interest in Mill Creek Road. Graham sent them a reply that was only 2 pages long, but sharp enough to make them stop contacting us. Vanessa's access to any property discussions ended immediately. Her future claim through Caleb was barred under the trust terms unless a court ever found no coercion had occurred, which Graham said was unlikely given the evidence. Caleb's inheritance was suspended, not because I hated him, but because Walter had written the consequence that way. "Your father left room for restoration," Graham explained to him, "but not without accountability." Caleb moved out of the house he shared with Vanessa a week later. He came to my porch on a gray evening with a duffel bag in his truck and a face that looked 10 years older. For a long moment, he stood there without speaking. Then he said, "I failed you." My first instinct was to say no. Mothers are trained by love to soften the blade, even when the blade has already cut them. But I had spent months being called confused, selfish, unstable, and sentimental. I had earned the truth. So I said, "Yes, you did." He closed his eyes. I continued, "But failure is not the end unless you defend it." He began crying then, quietly, one hand covering his mouth like he was ashamed to make sound. I let him cry on the porch. I did not rush forward. That was new for me. Love was still there, but it no longer meant erasing the wound before he had looked at it. When he came inside, he sat at the same kitchen table where Vanessa had once pressed paperwork toward me. He stared at Walter's empty chair by the window and said, "Dad knew I might not protect you." I poured coffee into Walter's old mug and placed it before him. "Your father knew people can be led away from themselves. He loved you enough to leave a way back, but he loved me enough to lock the gate." Caleb nodded, tears falling into his hands. He told me Vanessa had been talking about the land from the beginning. She had called it their ticket out. She had said I would come around once I understood how lonely aging could become. She had told him I was manipulating him by staying attached to Walter. She had made him feel that choosing me meant failing his marriage. He said, "I thought peace meant not challenging her." I said, "Peace without truth is just surrender with better manners." Vanessa fought the story in public because public image had always mattered to her more than private decency. She posted online about toxic mothers-in-law, emotional captivity, widows who used grief as control, and men who could not grow up because their mothers kept them chained. For 2 days, people sympathized. Then Arthur Bell's wife, Judith, who had never started drama in 72 years of life, commented, "Was this before or after the forged deed?" The post disappeared within an hour. Vanessa's friends grew quiet. Her church circle stopped mentioning my grief. A woman who had once touched my grocery cart and told me not to push away help saw me near the produce section and suddenly became fascinated by tomatoes. I did not feel triumphant in the way I once imagined victory might feel. Revenge stories sound clean when told from a distance. In real life, justice comes carrying grief with it. I had won the land, but I had also learned how easily my son could be turned against me. I had protected Walter's promise, but I had heard his memory mocked in my own dining room. I had watched a woman I welcomed into my family treat my age like an opening and my kindness like a flaw. Some nights, I sat alone and felt anger arrive late, after the documents were already signed and the lawyers already gone. I would think of things I could have said, sharper things, crueler things. Then I would remember Walter's note. Let the paper speak. He knew me well enough to know I did not need to become Vanessa to defeat Vanessa. The trust gave Mill Creek a future. Graham helped me structure the land so it could generate modest income without being sold. The lower pasture was leased to a local farmer who grew hay and paid fairly. The creek path was repaired. The old barn, the one Vanessa had called a liability with roof damage, was restored with Caleb's labor and Arthur's supervision. We turned it into a gathering place for widows and older women facing financial pressure from relatives. I named it Walter's Table because my husband believed no grieving person should have to eat alone. On the first Saturday we opened it, 12 women came. One had been pressured to sell her home by a nephew. One had a daughter controlling her bank account. One had signed papers she did not understand and was trying to undo the damage. We served soup, bread, coffee, and the kind of silence that lets people breathe before they are ready to speak. Caleb worked on the barn steps that day. He kept his head down when women arrived, ashamed perhaps, or humbled. Later, as sunset stretched over the fields, he stood beneath the oak tree and said, "Do you think Dad would forgive me?" I looked at the apple trees, small and stubborn on the ridge. "Your father would forgive you," I said. "He would also expect you to become someone who does not need the same lesson twice." Caleb nodded. He had filed for divorce by then. Vanessa fought over furniture, savings, and reputation, but she could not fight for Mill Creek. Walter's one quiet page had removed the prize before she could fully touch it. Months later, when I was cleaning a drawer in the sideboard, I found a note Vanessa had left behind during one of her organizing days. It was tucked inside an old community cookbook, folded into a neat square. Her handwriting was elegant, almost delicate. The note read, "Evelyn signs, Caleb manages. Preston closes by August. Move her before winter. New house after sale." I stood in my living room holding that paper while sunlight crossed Walter's chair. There it was, her plan reduced to 5 cold steps. Sign, manage, close, move her. New house. No mention of Walter. No mention of love. No mention of family. Just a root around me. For a moment I felt something fierce enough to frighten me. Not because I wanted to hurt her, because I finally understood how little she had seen me as human. I was an obstacle with a signature, a widow occupying valuable space, an old woman to be moved before winter. I folded the note slowly and placed it into the evidence file, not because I needed it anymore, but because some truths deserve a permanent address. On the first anniversary of the family meeting, I drove to Mill Creek alone. The morning was clear and cool. The grass had been cut in the lower field. The creek sounded full from recent rain, and the apple trees had produced small, imperfect fruit. I carried a basket to the old oak and sat on the bench Walter had once leaned against when his body was failing, but his mind was still protecting me. From my purse, I took the envelope Graham had given me. It was no longer sealed. I had opened it after the meeting, alone in my kitchen with trembling hands. Inside was Walter's handwritten note and a copy of the protective page. I read the note again beneath the tree. "Evie, if someone is making you feel selfish for keeping what we built, remember that love does not ask a widow to surrender her shelter so greed can call itself progress. Stand still. Let the paper speak. I am still keeping my promise." I pressed the note against my chest. The wind moved through the oak leaves with a sound almost like applause, though I know life is not that sentimental. Still, I let myself believe Walter was near. Not as a ghost, not as a miracle, as a man whose love had been practical enough to outlive him. He had not left me diamonds or a fortune. He had left me land, instructions, protection, and proof that he knew my heart could be too gentle when cornered by family. Caleb arrived later with a toolbox in the back of his truck. He did not interrupt me at first. He stood at the gate until I waved him over. We walked the fence line together, and for the first time in a long while, silence between us did not feel poisoned. It felt like repair. Slow, uncertain, but real. He said he had joined a support group for men leaving controlling marriages. He said he was learning to recognize manipulation without needing someone else to name it for him. I told him I was glad. I did not say I was proud yet. Pride would come when his change had roots, not just leaves. That evening, after Caleb left, I stayed until sunset. The field turned gold, then amber, then blue at the edges. I thought about Vanessa standing in my dining room, calling the land dirt. I thought about the forged signature, the survey flags, the doctor appointment, the public pity, the way my son had almost let shame replace love. Then I thought about the women who would sit in Walter's barn, drink coffee, and learn that documents matter, that silence can be dangerous, and that dignity is not the same as passivity. My daughter-in-law tried to steal my late husband's land. She tried to make me look unstable, selfish, outdated, and weak. She used my son's love, my grief, my age, and my silence as tools against me. She thought the world would believe her because she was beautiful, polished, and loud in all the right ways. But Walter knew something she did not. He knew quiet people are not empty. Sometimes they are carrying every receipt, every message, every witness, and every page the greedy forgot to read. In the end, Vanessa came for my land. What she exposed was herself. What she lost was the future she tried to steal. And what she gave back to me, without ever meaning to, was the one thing grief had almost taken from me completely. My voice. Commentary time. There is a very specific kind of cruelty in this story that does not come through shouting. It comes through politeness. It comes through a polished smile, a soft voice, and a sentence that sounds helpful until you look closely and realize it is actually a knife. Vanessa did not walk into Evelyn's life screaming, "I want your land." She walked in complimenting the house, asking careful questions, calling herself family, and slowly learning where Evelyn was most vulnerable. That is what makes her dangerous. She understood that if she attacked Evelyn directly on day one, everyone would see the greed. So she wrapped greed in concern. She called control help. She called pressure planning. She called Walter's legacy dead equity. And the most disturbing part is that people around Evelyn almost accepted that language as normal. Let's be honest with ourselves for a second. How many people have seen this happen in real families? Maybe not with 46 acres of land, maybe not with forged deeds and estate lawyers, but with a house, a pension, jewelry, inheritance money, medical decisions, or even simple respect inside a home. Someone older owns something valuable, and suddenly everyone develops concern. Suddenly the widow is too emotional. The mother is too attached. The grandmother is too old-fashioned. The person who built the life is treated like an obstacle standing in front of other people's dreams. That is not concern. That is entitlement wearing a clean shirt. What makes Evelyn powerful is not that she was aggressive. She was not. She did not throw plates. She did not scream in the dining room. She did not chase Vanessa around the family with accusations. In fact, for a long time, Evelyn tried to preserve peace. And that is where this story becomes painfully realistic. Many kind people do not fight immediately because they do not want to damage the family. They think, maybe I misunderstood. They think, maybe if I stay calm, they will stop. They think, if I speak too strongly, my son will feel trapped. But the cruel person is not thinking about peace. The cruel person is studying every silence and turning it into permission. That is the part I want the audience to sit with. When Vanessa moved Walter's photograph, that was not a decorating choice. It was a test. When she opened Evelyn's mail, that was not organization. It was surveillance. When she scheduled a cognitive evaluation, that was not care. It was groundwork. When she spoke about Evelyn in public as if grief had damaged her judgment, that was not family worry. It was reputation sabotage. Vanessa knew exactly what she was doing. Before she tried to steal the land legally, she tried to steal Evelyn's credibility socially. Because if everyone believed Evelyn was confused, emotional, and unstable, then any document Vanessa produced later would look easier to accept. That is why Walter's one extra page matters so much. It is not just a legal twist. It is love in its most intelligent form. Walter understood something many people ignore. Affection without protection can leave someone exposed. He loved Caleb, yes, but he did not worship Caleb blindly. He knew his son had a good heart, but he also knew a good heart can be bent under pressure. That is a hard truth for any parent. Walter did not write that clause because he hated his son. He wrote it because he loved his wife enough not to gamble her safety on someone else's courage. That is a mature kind of love. Not dramatic, not loud, but incredibly powerful. And Caleb? Caleb is one of the most complicated parts of this story. He is not the main villain, but he is not innocent either. Some viewers may want to blame everything on Vanessa and completely excuse him because he was manipulated. But manipulation does not erase responsibility. Caleb watched his mother being spoken down to. He heard Vanessa call the land a burden. He saw Walter's memory being pushed aside. He knew his mother was hurt, and still, again and again, he chose silence because silence was easier than conflict. That is a dangerous weakness. Sometimes betrayal does not look like a person holding the knife. Sometimes it looks like a person standing close enough to stop it and choosing not to move. So here is a question for you. At what point does being caught in the middle become betrayal? Because Caleb kept acting as if he were neutral. But neutrality is not always neutral. When one person is being pressured and another person is doing the pressuring, standing in the middle often helps the stronger person. Caleb wanted peace, but he wanted the kind of peace that required Evelyn to surrender. That is not peace. That is comfort purchased with somebody else's dignity. The most chilling word in the whole story might be manageable. When the development representative said Vanessa had described Evelyn as emotional but manageable, the mask finally fell. That word revealed the entire mindset. Vanessa was not seeing Evelyn as a mother, a widow, a homeowner, or a human being with history. She was seeing her as a problem to be handled, a signature to be obtained, a body to be moved before winter. A woman whose grief could be used as evidence against her. That is why her downfall feels deserved. She did not simply want land. She wanted to erase the person standing on it. And let's talk about the land itself. To Vanessa, it was money. To Walter, it was safety. To Evelyn, it was memory, shelter, and proof that a hard life had produced something permanent. That difference is the emotional core of the story. Some people look at a property and see only market value. Other people see years of sacrifice buried in every acre. They see overtime shifts, skipped vacations, repaired shoes, cheap meals, and dreams that took decades to mature. Vanessa could not understand that because Vanessa did not respect anything that could not immediately elevate her lifestyle. She saw the field and imagined a new house. Evelyn saw the field and remembered a husband who had worked himself tired so she would never be pushed out. That is why the public meeting was such a strong turning point. Vanessa designed that room as a courtroom where she would be both prosecutor and judge. She invited the audience. She arranged the flowers. She placed the pen on the table. She rehearsed the language of concern. She expected Evelyn to look small in front of everyone. But Evelyn did something far more devastating than fighting emotionally. She let Vanessa finish building the stage, and then she brought in the truth. There is a special kind of justice in that. Vanessa wanted witnesses for Evelyn's surrender. Instead, she created witnesses for her own exposure. Notice how Evelyn's revenge was not impulsive. It was documented. That matters. In real life, emotional truth often needs practical support. You can know someone is lying. You can feel someone is manipulating you. You can be completely right in your heart. But when the room has been poisoned against you, feelings alone may not be enough. Evelyn needed records. She needed the doctor's report. She needed county documents. She needed the forged deed copy. She needed the survey photographs. She needed texts, voicemails, witnesses, and the lawyer. That is not coldness. That is survival with discipline. And there is another question worth asking. Why do people often believe the polished liar before they believe the quiet victim? Vanessa looked composed. She used modern language. She spoke about financial planning, generational security, emotional health, and family responsibility. Evelyn sounded old-fashioned because she spoke about promises, memory, and land. But sophistication is not the same as honesty. A cruel person with good vocabulary is still cruel. A greedy person with a beautiful blouse is still greedy. A liar who knows how to sound reasonable is still a liar. What I respect most about Evelyn is that she did not become Vanessa in order to defeat Vanessa. She did not start spreading ugly rumors. She did not create a false story. She did not try to destroy Caleb's marriage out of jealousy. She simply stopped protecting the lie. That is a very different kind of revenge. The strongest revenge is not always about doing something to the villain. Sometimes it is about removing the shield you were holding in front of them. Evelyn had been protecting Vanessa from consequences by staying quiet. Once she stopped doing that, Vanessa's own actions did the damage. Walter's note at the end is also important because it reframes the whole story. This was not just about a will. This was about being seen deeply by someone who loved you. Walter knew Evelyn might choose kindness too long. He knew she might hesitate because the pressure would come through family. So he left her a page that could speak when her voice was being dismissed. That is heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. Imagine loving someone enough to say, "When I am gone, and if people try to convince you that your pain is confusion, here is the proof that you are not alone." Vanessa lost because she underestimated 3 things: Walter's foresight, Evelyn's patience, and the power of paperwork. She thought beauty, confidence, and emotional manipulation would be enough. She thought Caleb's weakness would open the gate. She thought Evelyn's age made her easy to move. But she never considered that an older woman can be quiet and still be exact. She never considered that grief can sharpen memory instead of destroying it. She never considered that a man like Walter, who spent his life building slowly, would also protect slowly, carefully, and completely. Caleb's ending is not simple forgiveness, and I like that. Evelyn does not instantly erase what happened just because he cries on the porch. That would have felt false. Love can remain, but trust still needs repair. A son can be sorry and still responsible. A mother can forgive and still refuse to pretend. That is emotional maturity. Evelyn allows him back into her life, but she does not hand him the old version of access. He has to rebuild. He has to understand that regret is only the beginning, not the payment. The creation of Walter's table gives the story a deeper victory than simply defeating Vanessa. Evelyn does not just keep the land. She transforms it into protection for other women. That is how trauma becomes legacy. Vanessa tried to turn the land into luxury cabins and personal status. Evelyn turns it into a place where vulnerable women can sit, eat, speak, and be believed. That contrast is beautiful. One woman wanted to extract value. The other woman created value. One woman saw land as a ladder, the other saw it as shelter. So I want to ask you, as the audience, what would you have done in Evelyn's place? Would you have confronted Vanessa earlier? Would you have warned Caleb? Would you have gone straight to a lawyer after the first missing tax notice? Or would you, like Evelyn, have tried to preserve the family until the pattern became impossible to ignore? And what about Caleb? Do you think he deserves a second chance after standing silent for so long? Or do you think his silence caused too much damage to be forgiven easily? For me, the most satisfying part of this story is not that Vanessa was exposed. It is that Evelyn did not have to beg to be believed. She brought proof. She brought witnesses. She brought the page Vanessa did not know existed. And in that room, all the language Vanessa had used against her collapsed. Confused, collapsed. Selfish, collapsed. Emotional, collapsed. Unstable, collapsed. What remained was simple. A widow had been targeted, and the target had come prepared. That is the kind of revenge that stays with people. Not loud revenge, not reckless revenge, quiet revenge. The kind where the villain keeps talking because they think silence means weakness, while the person they are humiliating is calmly waiting for the exact second the truth will do the most damage. Vanessa came to that meeting expecting a signature. She left with exposure. She wanted Evelyn's land. Instead, she handed Evelyn back her voice. And maybe that is the real ending here. The land mattered. The will mattered. The trust mattered. But Evelyn's voice mattered most. Because once someone teaches you that your silence can be used against you, the day you finally speak becomes more than a defense. It becomes a return to yourself. If this story made you think about family, greed, silence, or the kind of betrayal that hides behind concern, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more emotional revenge stories with hidden truth, painful justice, and powerful endings, make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories.